Welcome back again. I am kind of on a roll with these videos about Cubase and the chord track. Coming up in a few days, I'm going to do another video on Dorico because by all means, I focus a lot of my time on that. But recently, I was working a lot with the chord track, trying to develop writing a number of pieces, a large volume of music really quickly, and the chord track was a help. As if you've watched my last couple of videos, you probably know that there's a lot of frustration and a lot of poor communication in the manual about how those features work. Today, I'm tackling the idea of how do you compose faster using these features, right? Because that's exactly what I was doing last week. And I learned a lot about it. And I wanted to represent some of the lessons learned and also hopefully convince people who, like myself, had just given up on these follow chord features and chord track features because they didn't work reliably, that there is a way to work with them reliably, okay? Here's a few of the principles that I have taken away. First of all, you can't be too specific about your voicings. If you've got to have absolute, perfect, fine control of your voicings, currently Cubase does not offer that. But if you're just trying to write music, you're trying, as I often am, to produce a piece of music that sounds great and you're trying to do it really quickly and you're willing to give up some total control, then using the method I'm about to outline can help you get from 0 to 60 really, really fast. Another takeaway is don't use the chord track so much on one instrument track where you have a bunch of MIDI and you're trying to build chords, because it's hard to troubleshoot, mainly because if you have a MIDI part and it's got 4 MIDI notes vertically, and in some cases Cubase's chord track will configure those 4 notes into a straight up triad. 2 of the notes might be playing the 5th, let's say, exactly the same octave, and it's hidden. So it looks like you got 3 notes going to 4 notes. It's hidden. It's very confusing. If you instead work around, you break them onto individual tracks, and that's what I've done here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, following this basic traditional model of soprano, alto, tenor, bass. That's a better workflow in my experience because you can see when the notes are not being used in the chord, but they're there. There is a default behavior in Cubase where if a MIDI note in your follow chord track is not represented in the chord or not needed to represent the chord, then it just mutes the MIDI note. There's also a setting in Cubase's preferences where you can hide those notes. And I'm not sure exactly where it is, but if we get to it, I'll see if I can find it in the settings. Cubase settings I wish they just had a little search box where you could search for those settings. So let's talk about how you can compose with Follow Chord Track. I've just recently done a video on understanding how the voicings work in chord tracks and how to get your voicings to display correctly, how to have some control over that. So I'm not going to be talking about that too much here. In this demo project, I am using the piano voicing right there. And the settings that I have, which are my favorite general, is triads are selected, 4-note chords, 5-note chords, and add root note are all selected. Now, generally, with regards to these last things, the lowest root note, lowest note, and highest note, I will set those based on my instrument. So what do I mean by that? Let's take, for example, I've got this ensemble, which I'll get to at the very end of the lesson. It's a bass, like a double bass symphonic instrument. And the lowest note that it's capable of is C0. So I will often set that in let me take myself off the camera. I will often set that here as my lowest root note. I will set as C0. All right, that'll be my lowest root note. But lowest note and highest note basically is, if I didn't have add root note checked, what should be the lowest note that it should play? Well, if I want to reserve the option to have duplicate root note, it's going to do 1 octave higher, as the tooltip says. Then I would go from C0 to C1. That would be C1's octave would be duplicate root. Therefore, C2, I would generally say, would be the lowest note I want in my standard. Sorry, I shouldn't be mousing over that. C2, so this is C0, my lowest root note possible. C1 would be the doubled, the duplicated. C2 should be the lowest note that should show up in one of my standard voicings. And then as far as highest note, I would say, okay, once again, I'll go to my soprano instrument, which in this case is my choir, and I'll find out what the highest note is there. So C5, and then I would go into my chord track and I would say, my highest note that I want is C5, because that's the highest one that my instruments for this ensemble are capable of supporting. So that is the first step to mastering how we use Follow Chord Track, setting up, building an infrastructure for yourself where you can have that very low bass note. You can have a duplicate root note if you want, but then an octave above that, all your voicings come in. Now, if you've done any orchestration or you're familiar with the principles of the harmonic series as it pertains to writing music, you'll know that the harmonic series typically goes, the first harmonic is the fundamental, let's say C0. The next harmonic is always 1 octave above that. The next harmonic is a fifth above that. The next harmonic is an octave above that. So you may actually want the lowest note to be C0, the duplicate root note to be C1, and actually the G above C1 to be your lowest note. So let's actually go through and do that. We'll say that the lowest note is not going to actually be C2, but it's going to be G2. And you can see over here, you can see the MIDI notes changing as I do this. That's actually pretty interesting. Let's highlight all of these and see how they change. I'm going to highlight, bring this all up here so you can see these ultra low notes, right? So I've got add root note selected. If I uncheck it, you can see it takes away my root notes. And this is crucial for building out a follow chord track tune where you really have proper voicings to work with. You want to have nice full sound, especially if you're working on trailers or orchestral stuff. Now, if I have my duplicate root note, you can see there's plenty of room in there for 1 octave higher. Now, above that, we would really want G1 to be the lowest note in our voicings, G1. But you can see how as I change this, it actually, because G1 here is my octave, I might go with actually a fifth above that, following the harmonic series, to D2. So I'm going to say D2 should be the lowest note in my standard voicing. My highest note is C5. That's based on what my instrument is capable of. The lowest root note is C0 because, again, that's what my instrument's capable of. So that's what I wind up with. That's the voicing that I get. All right. Now, if I were to change these, as you can see, I get different values, but that's what I'm going to do for now. And I've got basically, this is a piano voicing and we can hear it. I'm sorry that the you may notice here that this little part has naming that does not correspond to the chords up here, and I'm sorry about that. It's just ignore those. That was the original chord progression from another video that I did. Okay, but this is actually producing a C major followed by an E flat major, very cinematic sort of vibe, to a G minor, again a chromatic mediant. Okay, and then, or a mediant, not chromatic, and then B flat, that's chromatic mediant. Now, it didn't go to the F, and this is because there's not actually a note in there. As you can see, all of these notes are 2 bars. So I'm going to select those. I'm going to make them half as long and then duplicate them. And you'll see that now they change their voicing right away because up here we have an F. So now we get this nice B flat to F. And you'll notice that the chord voicing there is pretty steady because I have adaptive voicings turned on here, which is going to apply good voice leading. So things like the B flat from this B flat chord becomes a B flat in, well, it's in my F chord. You know, this is an interesting example. So this gets back to, this is definitely an aspect of mastering Follow Chord Track, and it gets back to a lesson I did a little while ago on how to use the voicings, what the voicings are doing. And this is weird, right? It should be an F major triad, but we've got an F, a B flat, a D, and a B flat. So what is going on here? Essentially, what I think is going on is that we have some sort of stylistic choice here that's not working well. And I would go through and check some of these checkboxes and see if I get a better option. So now I've got F, A, and C. So that's interesting. So when I choose the duplicate root note, it brings it down here and I get all these Fs and I just get a C. But I don't really want that. I much prefer this voicing where I get an F, an A, and a C. So I'm going to leave the duplicate root unchecked. And these are the kinds of changes that I might have to make from time to time. So now I get this nice B flat, a much more satisfying resolution there from the B flat to the A in the third of F. Okay, so that's our chord progression. But now I'm going to actually compose with it. So I'm going to take that soprano voice. I'm going to mute all these, right? And I'm going to take that soprano voice from my chord voicing, which is a C. And you can see the soprano voice right here. I've got this choir loaded up. And in my settings over here, I've got follow single voice. It's set to soprano. I'm using the chord voicings from the chord track. So what's in these 4 purple parts is exactly what's in these 4 orange parts. They're exactly the same notes because this is set to soprano, this is set to alto, this is set to tenor, and this is set to bass. Okay, so let's just listen to the choir and hear what that sounds like. So we got the C. Now the reason there's probably no note there, because that B flat right there may not actually be in this instrument. So that's a B flat 2. B flat 2 is right there. It's just out of range. So I'm not hearing that note. What I may want to do instead is choose a different instrument. Instead of choosing the soprano range here, I am going to go and choose the alto range. Here, and I'm just going to change this to an M with sustain. Now we have the C3, but we're also going to have the B flat 2. So now we have that range in the choir. This is an example of kind of what I was talking about, where like if you're willing and able in your music production, if it's practical for you to just let go of the fact that you don't have complete and total control and you're willing to get into a sort of compositional, collaborative conversation with Cubase, like this, like changing the instrument, changing the range based on what the chord track does, then you're going to find composing with the chord track possible and extremely productive. You can, using this method, easily create a 2-minute cue in a day. Easily. You can create a draft in 30 minutes, 40 minutes like this. I change the chord progression, I leave the instrumentation the same, maybe change the rhythm, and I've got a whole nother arrangement. It's amazing. So the price for that productivity is that you let go of a little bit of control, like you might have to change the range of your instruments and stuff. But this is still going to be a good sounding piece of music, as you'll see. So then I've got my strummed guitar here, which is taking this voice. So you can hear there's my choir. Really pretty. Now I'm going to bring in my bass. Super, super, super low notes. If that was too low, or I wanted to run this on a cello, let's say, I could make my lowest note be, let's say, G0. Let's go ahead and do that. Say my lowest root note has to be G0. Now I get higher bass notes. The last ingredient here is my action strings 2. So I've got this little pattern going on. It's a phrase-based pattern. So all together, I've got these 4 parts. And if I wanted to see what it would sound like if this was a G major chord, I can do that. You can see my B flat got changed to B. Maybe take this and turn this into an F sus4 instead. You can see the voicings change. Maybe make this into a B flat. And you can see how all my voicings change automatically based on my chord choices. So just like that, I can start to have sort of a collaborative, and as I said it a few minutes ago, I thought that's a really good perspective on this. If you're willing to approach the chord track as sort of a collaborator, where it's going to impose some ideas on you and you kind of go with the flow, I think you can finally find a cool workflow. I enjoy this process a lot, mainly because sometimes I'm under pressure to produce a lot of music quickly. Sometimes it's because I have lots of sound libraries that I don't know all of their inner workings, but their kind of default settings produce cool stuff. And I don't really want to, I don't have the time. It's not practical for me to like master every instrument. I've mastered a dozen that I use a lot. And then I have all these other sort of auxiliary instruments that are just cool and interesting flavors. I have Contact. I have Native Instruments Collector's Edition. So I have things like Fables, strummed guitar, action strings 2, session strings. Those are all phrase-based things. I have Hallion 2 from Hallion 7 from Steinberg, which has a fantastic sequencer, and a lot of their synth presets are these like highly rhythmic sequence things. Other phrase-based libraries like Damage, a bunch of stuff that Heaviosity makes. Loading those in with this kind of setup and just generating a chord progression and sort of then making creative judgments about what's working, what's not, is a really cool workflow. Just one other thing I want to get into is, let's say that I want to kind of build, actually build an arrangement where I'm going to be kind of bringing these instruments in one at a time, right? So let's say that I'm going to bring this piano chord down here, and I'm going to unmute the piano. Okay, so let's say I have this. I'm going to bring the guitar back a little bit. So I start to actually think about arrangement. I'm going to bring that piano down. So the piano and the choir comes in. Another piano chord. Maybe I want that bass to come in a little earlier. Then I'm going to have the guitar come in here on the B flat. Maybe I want those strings to come in a little later. I'll actually just duplicate all of these, create a new section, turn off my loop, right? So I'll do double that, get this out of the way, double that, double that, double that. Well, I guess I didn't really need to double that. And now I've got a 16 bar loop that kind of has an evolution to it, right? But the cool thing is that as I move these around, they're just going to match the chords. Like, just watch when I move these chords over here, watch what happens to these voicings. Look at how it just composed for me. And because I'm using phrase-based instruments and nice sampled libraries, all of it's going to sound great. So let's listen to that whole 16 bars. I'm going to, on the fly, change this C to an A minor just for fun. The guitar comes in there. It's all going to start again, but now the bass is on A. So you get the point. The point is here that using this workflow, it requires a little bit of compromise. It requires a little bit of setup. And it requires, most frustratingly, a lot of time, trial and error to really get to grips with Cubase. But hopefully my video here, which has been 20 minutes long, it's not a short video, but hopefully 20 minutes was worth it to you to get your head wrapped around how you could use this. Because now I could go and turn this into a full 2-minute cue, probably in the next hour, very easily. And if I want to rewrite the chords, it's a piece of cake. All the MIDI is just going to shift around for me because I'm using the Follow Chord Track feature on specific voices. I can create whole ensembles like this. I've just used a piano, choir, strum guitar, the strings, but I could add anything I want to this, any number of layers. It's all going to follow the chord track. All I have to really think about is, do I want this to be following the soprano, the alto? There's even actually in, this will be the last point that I make, and then we'll shut it down for the day. There is, when you go into your single voice options here, you'll see that there's soprano 2, alto 2, tenor 2, and bass 2. So sometimes if you are wanting to create a really fat production, or you're doing some big orchestral thing, don't just create SATB, but create SATB and SATB2, and see which voices turn up If there's no voices on that track, then, you know, don't use it, but you'll be able to see visually when they're not there. For example, if I were to duplicate this bass, but set its voice to bass 2, you can see how the MIDI events are empty. Okay, that's because there's a setting. It mutes. Cubase automatically mutes MIDI notes that the chord track it doesn't need or isn't using. And there is a setting in the preferences. Maybe it's under editing chords. Yes, there it is. Editing and then chords. Hide muted notes in editor. If I uncheck that, you'll notice that in these parts here, well, there should be. Let's see, did I do that correctly? Oh, I must not have done it correctly. So hit apply. Okay, why did that not remember? It doesn't seem to be letting me. So there it is. So you can see these notes, they've been muted. They show up as there's nothing in here. In this library too, or in this little part, there's 3 notes, they're muted. So you can leave that setting so it doesn't hide muted notes if you want to see them. I personally prefer to have them hidden. They just disappear. And I guess that's really something weird going on there. That it didn't get rid of them. Okay, I got rid of them that time. So the cool thing is here, like if I drag this MIDI part that looks like it's empty, and I drag it up here, suddenly it assigns notes to them because there are notes in the bass part. There weren't notes in the bass 2 part. Anyway, if you have questions, please post them in the comments. If you have requests on things you'd like me to cover more, I am definitely going to check out all my comments. And if somebody makes a suggestion that I think I can help with, I'll make a video about it. Please like and subscribe if you found this video useful. And thank you again so much for supporting my channel. And I will see you again soon. I'm going to be doing another video on Dorico, I promise, for all the Dorico fans out there. All right, bye for now.